Okay, so well, let's officially begin this show. Thank you guys, and I think that's kind of an interesting clip that nobody else has ever seen. That we never released that, so there you guys go. Well, listen, if you don't know who I am, I'm Marc Silber. I'm a photographer, educator in Carmel, California, and our show is brought to you by.
Oh, you might have hit the wrong button. Or, oh, you're screen sharing. I don't know if you can hear me. uh, you're muted, Mark. 1 second. 1 second for the technical difficulty, everybody.
I am muted. Okay. So this is
There we
what I
go.
wanted. What I wanted to show you is our friends here at Bay Photo Lab. If you guys have heard me, make sure you get out and make your own prints. This is so important. This is the basis of photography is prints, not just digital stuff. So Bay Photo Lab will help you with any kind of print that you want. So here they've got 15% off on metal prints. I have a few of them. They're actually pretty cool. They really are. You get 15% off on them. You can make an album. I love, we make albums for our trips and travel stuff and for our children. And it's a great way, it's a great gift, and it's just a great way to remember that moment, when you were traveling or surfing like this or whatever. 25% off on those albums. Make one. And these are press printed cards. Hey, one great way to promote yourself as a photographer is to get your best prints and make some cards and mail them out to clients and prospective clients. Write your name on that. Rachel did that just recently, and I want to give her a big shout out for that because it is important for people to see your prints, and that's one way they can do that. And you can also make cards for other occasions, but 30% off on these. And as always, you get 25% off on your first order. So run over after the show, run over to Bay Photo and get something from them, okay? So I want to remind you guys to be sure to subscribe and enable the bell because that's how you are going to get notified that we're broadcasting. Okay, so here's what I want to do. I want to enter into a discussion with you guys. Again, Jared, this is unreleased footage, right? We have never actually put this whole video up as far as... Yeah.
As far as I've looked up, because I found this same video clip, the one that you're going to share, I found it, and then I decided to use it for some YouTube shorts, which hopefully you guys have been enjoying. And when I tried to see where it was on YouTube, the full video, I couldn't find it. So I think this got lost in the shuffle and we never released this particular video.
Okay, well, listen, what we're going to do is I'm going to play some bits and then we're going to stop and talk about it. So here we are, and I'm just going to get a little better arrangement of that on the screen for you guys. And we're going to listen to what Bob Holmes has to say about composition. Let's talk about some of the specific things you might use in composition, like diagonal lines.
So there are crutches. This photograph I took in a bridge in just outside Mandalay in central Myanmar is about diagonal lines. Mm-hmm. It's a shot that I didn't really pre-visualize it. It's serendipity. Mm-hmm. A lot of the photographs that you take that you're really pleased with is this serendipitous events. Mm-hmm. You've just got to be there. Anybody could take them if they were there and knew their equipment and knew how everything was going to, and could see in their mind what the end result would be like.
I think that's also a form of pre-visualization, just to know that if you put yourself in that environment, you're going to find it.
So this was shot at dawn. I waited on the bridge, and there are people going to work. This is a commute path. And if I wait here, I'll get people on bikes coming along, people walking up and down. I've just got to wait for the right person. And as I sat there, my back was, I was facing towards the sunrise, and a woman came past, just one woman in one of these conical hats with a lunch pail, and I sat there and took a photograph of her. Seconds later, a second woman came along, got another shot of the two of them, then a third one came along, and then a fourth one came along. Unbelievable luck.
Yeah.
Unbelievable luck. But I was ready, I was prepared, and I got the shots. This shot wasn't made in a 60th of a second. It was made in half an hour.
Yeah.
But it took that long to get the final shot. And then I knew I'd nailed it.
Right.
And it's one of my most satisfying shots in Myanmar. But it's all about diagonal lines. It's diagonals, which gives it vitality. There's a lot of content in it. Women commuting to work with their lunch pails.
Yeah.
There are a lot of elements in it that make it a very successful photograph for me.
Well, Ansel Adams said, stop and talk about this, because this is a point that I've made in the critiques often, which is when you get to a spot like Bob is talking about, you see this is going to make a great photograph, but he had to wait. He said it didn't happen in 60 seconds. He had to wait a half an hour, and you wait and you wait, and you can see that was such a great description of the first woman coming into the scene, and the second one, the third one, and then finally it was that fourth woman that made that perfect photograph. And this is a really important thing to remember, you guys. Actually, we're going to talk about some of the other things he mentioned there too. But when you find a scene, it's like finding a set. You find a place where you can see a photograph can really roll out. And Bob says you smell a photograph. Don't be in a hurry. Don't go somewhere else, because if you wait, that photograph could really unfold for you. And I've seen this you've heard me mention this in the critique show, that oftentimes it's just a perfect setting, it's really well framed, the lighting is great, but the action hasn't happened yet. But maybe it will in half an hour. So, keep that in mind. This isn't a sport where you have to, try to do it in 1 second. This isn't basketball where like last night we had a big game, and they lost it in the last few seconds. Sometimes that's true with photography. Yes, there can be that absolute split-second moment. You got to be there, but even there, you got to be prepared for that. So the other point he's making, and this is something I really love, is diagonal lines add vitality, they add interest, they give you the feeling of motion. So look around. If you see a scene with diagonal lines in it, go for it. These are really two big points. So let's listen to what else is going on here in this discussion.
I don't think we've switched over.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
You got me here to monitor the stream.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's rephrase. Chance favors the prepared photographer.
Yeah.
So you're prepared, he saw Half Dome moonrise on his way to Diawani, pulled over, and he got it in a minute.
Yeah.
But he was prepared.
Yep, you have to be prepared. And this, I was giving this 100% concentration for half an hour.
Let's talk about symmetry in your photography.
Yeah, symmetry is something I use quite a lot. I like symmetry. My training was in architecture and city planning.
Huh.
So I worked at that for 14 years in England. And I think because of that, symmetry is something that I'm attracted to. Again, in Cuba, a couple of months ago, I was photographing a little boxing gym, a really run-down boxing gym in central Havana. And one of the great things about Cuba is the color. The colors are phenomenal. Everywhere you go, is amazing colors. And so is the case here in this boxing gym, with incredible blues. And with the red of the stands, it just cried out to have a boxer in there taping his hands up with, of all like a primary yellow tape. They've got 3 primary colours, red, blue and yellow. What more could you want as a photographer? But it's the symmetry that made the shot. I wanted it to be symmetrical.
Yeah.
It just came together for me as a symmetrical photograph. And very often portraits I shoot symmetrically. This portrait of a guy in Western Cuba,
Cuban cigar,
smoking a cigar. I wanted the cigar because it's Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
I like his hat in the background framing the photograph.
Yeah.
And then I shot it until the smoke was in just the right configuration. It took a lot of frames.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the smoke went over his face, over his eyes. With this kind of shot, you always have to focus on the eyes because we always have eye contact. Whether it's a painting, a photograph, or in person, we always look at each other's eyes. So if the eyes are soft, it's not going to work.
Right.
Always focus on the eyes. The fact that the tip of the cigar is not sharp is irrelevant. You don't even really notice. But it's a symmetrical photograph. It needed to be symmetrical mainly because of the hat framing the shot.
Mm-hmm.
But I use symmetry quite often. Two other elements that come into the composition aspects of photography.
Symmetry. Use that as a tool because as he says, it really does add a lot of interest. And I think it's interesting. He showed us, I've seen many of his photographs where he's using symmetry, but he showed us that great one in the gym, and it's in his mind, you see. If you know these tools, and this is something I mentioned because when I wrote this book, I put those points in there. I put symmetry, and he graciously allowed me to use his photograph. You have to know the rules. And I'm going to actually be talking about this at 12 noon. I'm doing a webinar. Jared could maybe put the link in there. I'm actually going to be talking about not just composition, but if you approach photography like a game, any game, what do you have to know to play it? You got to know the rules. And just list whether it's basketball, hockey, chess, checkers, any card game. If you don't know the rules, you're not going to be able to win. It's that simple. But there's something that happens once you know the rules, then you can start to think with them. They don't become restrictions, they become areas that you then know how you can utilize to win the game. And clever players, that's exactly what they do. And Bob is winning the game of photography because he understands, and these are not really rules or guidelines, but he understands what these different elements are. So when you see a diagonal line or you see symmetry, it's like that should say something to you. But if you don't really know what that is, you could walk right by it. And this is really my key point about composition. You have to be able to very quickly recognize those elements that you can utilize in your composition. And he mentioned, he came from the background of being an architect. So architects do think in these design elements, and they're certainly using symmetry all the time. So his eye was already trained to see that. And that's a key point. These things don't just fall out of the sky and put a big border around and say, hey, press the shutter, I'm a great photograph. You really have to find those photographs. And you have to train yourself to see what works and what doesn't. And it comes from knowing what these compositional elements are and then practicing them until they become rather instinctive and they just fall in place for you. So, hey, look, I'm looking at your guys' chat here. Please chime in. We can start doing this as a Q&A right now. I'd like to hear if you have questions or comments about your composition. Now is your chance. But I really want to stress this point. and I was inspired watching a game in basketball here between the Golden State Warriors, which happens to be our home basketball team. Steph Curry, you've probably heard of him. He's pretty amazing. And the Lakers with LeBron James. They call him King James. Pretty amazing game that happened last night that unfortunately was won by the Lakers in the last few seconds by 3 points. And we were a little bummed out by that. But this is what inspired me to look at this and go, boy, both of those guys know those rules so well. They know the game of basketball better than anybody right now alive. And one team had a slight advantage. There was one maybe little point where we could have won and we didn't. But, this is at the highest level of playing a game. But as a photographer, you do need to know what is your game? What are you trying to accomplish? And then what are the elements of that game? I'm not even going to call them rules because you really don't have to be locked into them as rules, but you certainly have to know what they are. Okay.
I think if you don't mind me adding in a little bit of a 2 cents, I think one thing that when you get really good at really anything, and this is one reason why it's so great that you use the word tools, because that's really all these composition guidelines are. They're tools, and you can see how things change, or you can see that the exceptions sometimes that you use. Like sometimes symmetry is good, and sometimes asymmetry is good. And I think you're muted. I don't know if you're saying anything right now. When you're on the screen share, you're muted.
You're right. Thank you, Jared. Well, let's play a little bit more, and I would like to hear from you guys, your questions, your comments, and let's see what Bob has to say next.
Two other elements that come into the composition
Yeah.
aspects of photography, and they're incredibly important. Two of the most important things that I personally think, one is punctuation in photographs. You can get potentially great photographs that just need that extra little thing to make them sing.
Yeah.
And I call that punctuation. And it can be a very tiny part of the photograph, like the ballet dancer in the ballet school in Havana. Also in Havana, this photograph I took of the classic old cars. You have to shoot that. The color here was obviously phenomenal.
It is.
Pink walls, green walls, blue car, but it needed punctuation. And and again, it's serendipity. It had all the elements that I wanted to say Cuba, but I needed punctuation. This guy walks by in a red shirt, and that is the punctuation in the shot. It's not a photograph of a person. He's purely symbolic.
Yeah.
But it makes the photograph, and that's incredibly important. I do this a lot. Most of my photographs, try to get something in there that will punctuate the image. That makes it more than just an ordinary static shot. Another example of punctuation, again, red. It's a cliche color to use for it, but it works. And again, a very colorful scene in Trinidad in Cuba, which is an amazingly photogenic town. But the colors of the buildings and these blue posts, this cried out for a photograph, but it needed that extra element in there. And a guy walks by in a red shirt, and adds the punctuation. The other element that...
All right, so punctuation. I love that from Bob Holmes, and it really does add this point where he's talking about, it really makes that photograph come to life. Bob and I had this discussion how, he started off as a landscape photographer, and I did a lot of landscape. I do portraiture and landscapes, but, he said he always waited for people to get out of the frame before he pressed the shutter, and I did the same thing. I thought, oh man, I wish these people would get out of the frame here. Now I embrace those people. If there's a hiker on a trail and you can see them, maybe they're only this big, but it does a couple of things. It adds that punctuation point, but it also gives scale. And Bob talked about this in another interview. It gives scale to your photograph. You see this tiny person, you can then recognize how big this mountain is. And he is very clever about using people in his frame. And that's another thing as far as creating your photograph is you look at all the elements that you can utilize, and you choreograph that. Maybe you have to move because that person is over there and they're kind of getting out of the frame, or they're not lined up exactly where you want them. They're going to be hidden by a tree or something, or there's something else going on. But if you move to the right spot, all of a sudden that person becomes a player, an active ingredient in your photograph, whereas before you might have considered them a distraction. And I think you're hearing this in this short little interview that we're playing, that Bob is very aware of what is going on in the world over here that he's photographing, and very little attention on his camera. This is another big secret ingredient. He hasn't mentioned it here, but if you let your camera distract you, you're going to lose the photograph. It's that simple. That's why you do need to know your camera. You need to know it so well that it doesn't get in your way, but that's not the point. It's a tool that you use, and your focus, your attention needs to be on the whole world here. Like, he had to be aware of those people, the women walking across the bridge. He had to have, in his peripheral vision, the vision and see that fourth woman come into the frame. And if he was fiddling and monkeying around with his camera and even doing this, which we call chimping, you're going to miss the shot. And this is where, as photographers, we really have to get beyond the point where the camera is in the way or it's anything other than a tool for creativity. Do you guys agree with me on that? I'd love to hear your comments and your feedback. And this is why I've always enjoyed talking with Bob so much, because everything he says resonates with me and my own photography, and with you guys. Obviously, you love him as well because his videos are very popular, and he's always popular to have on the show. Be sure to, head over to his Instagram. I'm just going to pop it up there so you can see it. Bob Holmes Photo. You guys should follow him. You should pay attention to him because you're going to learn a lot from seeing what he's putting on his Instagram. And he tells little stories about what he's photographing. And like, he ran a whole series of photographing around his house, around where he lives. And he made a point, like, in COVID, we can't travel, but keep photographing right around your own home environment. So be sure, definitely follow Bob, and definitely check out his other stuff. Check out his workshops, because, you may have the opportunity of a lifetime to travel with him and come away with not just amazing photographs, but what will last forever is your knowledge of how he sees, how a great photographer sees, and what they look for. And I guarantee you, we're all walking by those photographs, myself included, if we're not tuned in. If we're not carefully looking and seeing, we just walk on by, and that's not something that you want to do. And every great photographer that I've interviewed brings this up. You really, really have to be focused on what you're doing. You have to understand what, some of these, not rules so much as guidelines, so that when you see them, they jump out at you. Okay, guys, well, thank you for joining us. I'm here for a minute here, just in case you do want to pop in a question or a comment. Let's take a look at it. Again, I will be doing this webinar in about an hour, a little over an hour and a half, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about this point of the one thing you really need to know as a photographer. What do you think that is? The one thing you really have to know as a photographer. And we'll be definitely diving into it. And Yvette, you don't need to travel You can make perfect images everywhere if you have eyes. That is absolutely true. Because think about it, people travel to wherever you are because it's fresh for them, right? And sometimes because we see something over and over again, like I look out here yesterday or day before yesterday, there was a huge hawk that flew right by my window here. Well, if I had been better prepared, of course I wasn't, I was in the middle of a class. If I was better prepared, I would have captured, that would have been an amazing photograph. So you do have to be prepared. Remember I made that point? Chance favors the prepared mind, which is, Louis Pasteur said that. Chance favors the prepared photographer. Ian said, Bob's tips and maxims are the ones I go back to again and again. Yes. Because you have his philosophy really matches mine, which is it ain't about gear, folks. And most, I hate to say this, most of what's going on in the internet and YouTube is gear oriented. Okay, well, it's fine. I watch some of those videos too. But to be stuck on gear is just it's like having a car in your garage. Okay, great. You got a beautiful car in the garage, but are you ever driving it? Are you enjoying it? Are you taking the top down and letting the wind blow? And that's, to me, the way I use a car. I'm not a collector. I'm, a utilizer of that as a mode of transportation, having some fun. I posted, I'm sorry, Jake. I posted today a photo on AYP Facebook of my daughter. She's the main subject. Other thing is the light that I'm focusing on. That's great. We'll have a look at that. You know, your center of attention is your photograph, who you're photographing, your daughter, and that's absolutely perfect. And that's really what we're trying to do with our camera, you guys, is we're telling stories. Bob, every one of those photographs that he showed us, he's telling a story. He's showing us what it's like in Cuba. He's showing what it's like in Miramar. He's showing us, around the world what it's like. And he's a travel photographer, and that's one of the things he does. That's not all he does. He photographs lots of other things, wineries, and he's produced something like 48 books. Amazing. And Gavin, hello, Cape Town. I love it. One of my most famous photographs was shot at Hermanus near Cape Town. And thank you for providing me such beautiful content to photograph. Very inspiring. Okay, well, we're going to wrap it up. I got to get ready for my webinar. I hope you guys can head over there in about an hour. What is it? A little...
hour, 20 minutes or so.
Hour and 20 minutes. We've got the link in there. And before I forget, I want to remind you guys to subscribe and enable the bell. Because if you don't do that, YouTube isn't going to let you know when we're posting a new video. So please do that. Tell your friends. Leave your comments. Share. And like. And I guess I'll pick up this last question from Elisa. Do you prefer the analog or digital camera? I love these cameras. They're beautiful works of art, every one of them. They're amazing cameras, but I'm really a digital photographer at this point. Only because it gives me a latitude of tools that I can utilize. I do shoot with these on occasion, but they're not my go-to cameras. I could do a whole show about why that is, but I come from the film era of photography, so I have embraced it fully in terms of how I photograph. I tend to photograph like I'm still shooting film, and I try to make every frame really matter rather than just I don't agree with that, but and I do not heavily process my images. I do what I would do in a darkroom. I maybe bring out the contrast and tweak this and tweak that, but I don't manipulate images. That's just me, though. Okay, so join us, hour and 20 minutes, and
And I also put this into the chat. People could sign up for our newsletter too to stay in touch as well.
You should do
sometimes
that.
even when you ring that bell, YouTube doesn't notify people. And
That's right.
so our newsletter is a great way to stay in touch. So I put that link in the chat as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Jared. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. Use these tools that Bob went over. Use them. Get out this weekend and capture your photographs. And say this with me, if you would, okay? Remember to get out and capture your own images of life. Stay well, you guys. Stay safe, but stay creative more than anything else. See you soon.